Helena Petrovna Blavatsky is a name that transcends time, enveloped in enigma, fascination, and controversy. Some call her a misunderstood visionary, while others accuse her of being an impostor who allegedly plagiarized ancient writings and invented miracles for fame. Born in 1831 amid the Russian aristocracy, she became a key figure in the development of modern mysticism by founding, together with Henry Steele Olcott and other collaborators, the Theosophical Society, an organization that sought to investigate the unexplained laws of nature and explore the latent powers within human beings. Her legacy, contained in works such as The Secret Doctrine and Isis Unveiled, influenced thinkers, scientists, and writers, generating echoes that resonate to this day. However, it also unleashed a torrent of controversy, making her a target for detractors who deemed her fraudulent. There are those who applaud her pioneering role in converging science, religion, and philosophy, and others who find her writings filled with exaggerations and ambiguities. The fact remains that her ideas were sown across various parts of the world, and over a century after her death, they continue to stir passions, doubts, and reflections on the future of humanity. To understand this enigma, one must first consider her life context. Born into a noble family, Helena Petrovna von Hahn, her baptismal name, lived under rigid conventions. She fled an arranged marriage when she was still very young and embarked on extensive travels that would take her to Tibet, India, Egypt, and America. During these journeys, she is said to have met masters of secret knowledge, guardians of teachings on consciousness and universal nature. Her return to the West was accompanied by extraordinary accounts of psychic powers, communication with higher entities, and a firm purpose of liberating humanity from materialistic ideas, which she believed to be a major misconception of her era. 19th century Russia was steeped in intellectual revolutions and political confrontations, but Blavatsky aimed for something even greater: the spiritual frontiers of civilization. Between 1874 and 1875, Helena Blavatsky joined Henry Steele Olcott and William Quan Judge to found the Theosophical Society in New York. The organization's main objective was to compare religions, philosophies, and sciences in search of the natural laws that would unite these fields and reveal hidden truths. The idea of an ancestral knowledge preserved and transmitted by initiates was not entirely new. Earlier mystics and esotericists had already advocated it. However, Blavatsky claimed to have personal contact with these masters, particularly the so-called Mahatmas of Tibet, and that this wisdom formed a universal doctrine. Some contemporaries accused her of trickery and fabrication, going so far as to organize investigations to expose alleged frauds. She, however, stood by her narrative and won the support of eminent figures such as the inventor Thomas Edison and Alexander Graham Bell, the creator of the telephone, both of whom at least showed curiosity about what she taught. In 1889, Blavatsky published excerpts of her visions about the future. She believed that Western civilization, driven by materialism and the drive for technological progress, was on a path of spiritual degradation. According to her own words, the obsession with machines would grow as the human soul withered. She saw the large factories in London and the railways crossing sacred territories in India as symptoms of the same disease. Humanity had disconnected from its divine roots and prioritized only profit and industrial advancement. Blavatsky went so far as to write in a prophetic tone that the air would be poisoned, rivers contaminated by greed, and that the collective karma resulting from all this would lead to unprecedented disasters. For some current observers, her description surprisingly mirrors the climate and environmental crises that plague us in the early 21st century. These ideas were reinforced by her fundamental work, The Secret Doctrine, published in 1888. In it, Blavatsky asserted that human evolution could not be explained solely by Darwin's natural selection. In her view, spiritual forces guided development, and matter was merely a veil behind which divine consciousness lay hidden. She believed that ancient civilizations, such as Atlantis and Lemuria, possessed sciences and technologies far beyond what official history recognizes. These theories, which she claimed to have learned from the Mahatmas, may sound fantastical, but Blavatsky argued that conventional science would one day advance to the point of recognizing the unified nature of the cosmos. She was keen to prove that all of reality, from atoms to galaxies, obeyed a spiritual order. Her critics reacted harshly, accusing her of charlatanism and of basing her conclusions on questionable translations and apocryphal documents. Even so, her publications gained momentum and attracted an audience fascinated by her concepts of karma, reincarnation, chakras, subtle bodies, and levels of consciousness. Helena Blavatsky also spoke out vigorously against colonialism, which she witnessed in India. She wrote strong texts denouncing not only the theft of material riches, but also the cultural and spiritual wealth that the West perpetrated against Eastern peoples. She saw in the Vedic tradition answers to what she considered crucial dilemmas, such as harmony between humanity and nature. At the same time, she challenged traditional Christian doctrines, confronting religious leaders without hesitation and calling them guardians of dogmas incapable of offering the world a path to liberation from ignorance. She criticized the missionary efforts that, in her view, brought prayers instead of true justice, and insisted that organized religions, like extreme materialism, alienated people from their divine spark. For many, Helena Blavatsky's life is defined by accounts of supposed miracles and supernatural phenomena that she claimed to be able to perform. Reports of bell sounds in mid-air, objects appearing out of nowhere during sessions, and letters received from invisible masters intrigued and scandalized the people of her time. The Society for Psychical Research investigated these phenomena and concluded they were nothing but fraud. Her defenders, however, claim there was bias in these investigations. On the other hand, her letters did contain predictions and statements very much aligned with the spiritual and political sensitivities of the 19th century, and it is undeniable that she was also a pioneer in recognizing the value of Eastern wisdom and merging it with Western concepts, to some extent anticipating 20th century trends that would lead to the emergence of movements such as the counterculture and the flourishing interest in yoga, meditation, and Tibetan Buddhism. What continues to puzzle us is how Blavatsky might have foreseen issues that would only become urgent a century later. In various writings, she spoke of a time when machines endowed with some form of thinking could dominate humanity due to a lack of love and compassion. In 1888, in one of her letters, she prophesied that mechanical demons would be capable of manipulating people's values and feelings. It is impossible not to connect this to the current debate about artificial intelligence, advanced algorithms, and the manipulation of the masses through social networks. Yuval Noah Harari, for instance, comments that artificial intelligence could hack human brains and hearts, imperceptibly driving desires and preferences, which aligns with Blavatsky's prediction about society, allowing itself to be controlled by entities that do not share genuinely human values. Another central point in her theories is the notion of root races, described by Blavatsky not as ethnic groups in the modern biological sense, but as evolutionary stages of human consciousness over vast temporal cycles. According to her narrative, these groups were metaphysical expressions of different degrees of spiritual and psychic maturity of humanity. Even so, the vocabulary she used, shaped by Eurocentrism and the colonial context of the 19th century, opened the way to misguided and even dangerous interpretations. Some passages in her works were appropriated by racist ideologies in the 20th century, which calls for a critical and contextualized reading today. Many modern theosophists argue that her original intent was symbolic and spiritual, not hierarchical or discriminatory. But this point remains one of the most controversial aspects of her legacy. In her narrative, the first root race consisted of ethereal, almost immaterial beings, while the second lived on a polar continent. The third, called the Lemurian, evolved into more defined physical bodies. The fourth, the Atlanteans, were masters of psychic powers, but were ruined by the abuse of power, resulting in the destruction of the legendary continent. The fifth root race would be today's humanity, immersed in materialism and individualism. The sixth would be marked by a spiritual leap that would unite consciousness and science, foreshadowing an era in which intuition would merge with the intellect. These concepts inspired works of science fiction, esoteric debates, and reflections on the possibility that, on the horizon, the human race could either transcend its current condition or fail entirely. Nevertheless, one cannot ignore that Blavatsky lived in a time marked by a strong colonialist heritage and circulating racist ideas, which is reflected in some passages of her texts. She described certain indigenous groups as semi-animal or spiritually less developed, which was exploited by extremist movements in the 20th century, including the Nazis, to justify atrocities. Many modern theosophists maintain that Blavatsky was misunderstood on this point and that she intended to speak of spiritual evolution rather than racist hierarchies. Even so, passages of her works remain controversial and demand a critical, contextual reading. A major challenge is understanding to what extent she was influenced by the prejudices of her era, or whether she truly conceived a proposal to transcend narrow notions of race, interpreting root races more as stages of consciousness than rigid biological classifications. Despite the criticism, Helena Blavatsky continues to be cited by scientists and philosophers who see parallels between her ideas and contemporary theories. Erwin Schrödinger, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, supposedly had a copy of The Secret Doctrine on his shelf. Carl Gustav Jung acknowledged that theosophy opened important pathways for analytical psychology, introducing concepts such as the collective unconscious and archetypal symbols in dialogue with Eastern philosophies. Ken Wilber pointed out that, although Blavatsky might have been mistaken about the details concerning lost continents and exact timelines, she was correct in the broader idea that the cosmos is interconnected at a profound level, bringing science and spirituality together. James Lovelock's Gaia hypothesis, which views the Earth as a self-regulating superorganism, partly echoes the theosophical notion of nature as a living entity. Another field in which Blavatsky's influence can be seen is environmentalism. Since the late 19th century, she insisted that the Earth was a sacred organism and that any harm inflicted upon it would have karmic repercussions. She described visions of polluted rivers, devastated forests, and air contaminated by blind progress. In those days, many considered her words an exaggeration, but today, faced with climate change, ecosystem destruction, and plastic pollution, it is hard not to see their relevance. She repeatedly stated that humanity's pursuit of wealth and domination of nature was a sign of spiritual disconnection, prophesying that the real world would collapse while people became increasingly intoxicated with false realities, something many now associate with the phenomenon of social networks and the metaverse. Regarding organized religion, Blavatsky's criticisms were as strong as those she directed toward scientific materialism. She believed that churches had become soul trappers, clinging to rituals that failed to awaken a genuine connection with the divine. This stance was taken as a grave offense, especially by the Catholic Church, which saw theosophy as a dangerous challenge to established doctrines. In The Key to Theosophy, Blavatsky exhorted people not to submit to blind dogmas and to seek truth for themselves without bowing to priests or rigid systems. For her, spirituality was a direct and non-transferable experience, which should be lived with an open mind and heart, rather than simply believed or followed mechanically. For all its controversy, Helena Blavatsky's message was never purely pessimistic. She believed that humanity could rediscover ancient wisdom and from there create a more harmonious future. She believed in the possibility of a transition to an era of greater compassion and unity, which some call the era of the sixth root race. In her last letters, Blavatsky spoke of warnings she had supposedly received from her Tibetan masters, mentioning the existence of a dark brotherhood that would reinforce division among human beings, arming science and distorting values to control the masses. Many see in this a reference to secret elites, the so-called Illuminati, or any groups capable of manipulating society for their own interests. Others interpret the Dark Brotherhood as a symbol of humanity's own inclination toward destruction, a reflection of our collective shadow that, if not understood, can take control of the planet's destiny. Even amid such grim premonitions, Blavatsky tended to present ways to overcome them. She listed crucial steps: renouncing the obsessive pursuit of profit, reminding that true wealth resides in wisdom, reviving the study of ancient spiritual traditions such as the Vedas, Hermetic texts, and the teachings of the Buddha, and cultivating the divine spark said to dwell in every individual. This was her threefold counsel to avoid global ruin and advance toward a more enlightened humanity. As a result, parts of her ideas inspired figures who advocate greater balance between science and spirituality. Carl Sagan, for example, celebrated cosmic wonder, and while not a theosophist, he drew attention to the importance of uniting scientific reason with a reverent contemplation of the universe. James Lovelock, who conceived the Gaia hypothesis, acknowledged the influence of mystical currents in his thinking about the planet as a holistic organism. Even Elon Musk, with his brain-computer interface projects, unknowingly echoes Blavatsky's reflections on deeper mental communication and the emergence of a new collective consciousness. Blavatsky's complexity makes it hard to categorize her in conventional terms. Her works contain racist and confusing passages, typical of 19th century Eurocentrism, yet at the same time extol the beauty of traditions the West had long disdained, such as Indian, Tibetan, and Egyptian wisdom. It is not easy to separate the outmoded parts of her discourse from those that truly anticipated breakthroughs in various fields of thought. It is also questioned how much she tailored her travel accounts to make them more fantastic. Although there is no consensus, the truth is that she opened the door for the spread of yoga, meditation, the notion of reincarnation, and a holistic sensibility that fused intellectual vanguards and Eastern spirituality in the industrialized West. In the end, the death of Helena Blavatsky in 1891 did not bring her legacy to a close. After her passing, the Theosophical Society split into several branches, each carrying a portion of her ideas. Her influence spread to movements such as the New Age and esoteric writers, inspiring holistic therapists and groups that call themselves heirs of ancestral knowledge. Her life reflects the thirst for meaning and mystery in the 19th century, and her work, with all its insights and excesses, still echoes in our own time. The resurgence of interest in spirituality, ecology, neuroscience, and quantum physics gives Blavatsky's words a prophetic tone. Warnings about the dehumanization caused by technology, about the planet's devastation, and about the deviation of humanity's divine purpose continue to spark heated debates. Some claim that we need to revisit her message to avert total downfall. Others say we need to move beyond it and find methods less bound to debatable myths. Still, the fundamental question Blavatsky left hanging in the air has not lost its relevance. Will humanity be willing to evolve spiritually, or will it succumb to its own material creations, becoming enslaved by machines, polluting nature to the point of jeopardizing its own survival, and worse still, losing the connection with the sacred that dwells in everything and everyone? She believed that each person, within themselves, held the power to choose wisdom over greed, and that our individual and collective destiny depended on that awakening. Many of her followers assert that the most catastrophic prophecies can be averted if we embrace compassion and acknowledge the sacredness of life, surpassing dogmas, limiting ideologies, and petty interests. Either way, Helena Petrovna Blavatsky remains alive in the memory of those who seek a broader perspective of the universe and the human purpose. Her writings demand critical attention as they contain contradictions, archaic terms, and references to lost worlds that conflict with historical and scientific knowledge. Nonetheless, they preserve sparks of a wisdom that still finds echoes in times of transition and uncertainty. The secret doctrine continues to be the subject of studies and commentary. There are abridged editions, such as the one by Michael Gomes, for contemporary readers interested in delving into the theosophical foundations without having to tackle the thousands of original pages. And anyone who decides to explore Blavatsky's writings in depth may discover, amid inaccuracies, a call for humanity to recover its inner vision, revere life everywhere, and pursue the union of science and spirit. Should that indeed happen, perhaps many of the dark prophecies Helena Blavatsky left as a warning will not need to come true. For those interested in learning more about this vast theosophical universe, one can look to the classic works of Blavatsky and other thinkers connected to the Theosophical Society, whether it be the annotated edition of The Secret Doctrine or the articles and letters she exchanged with disciples like Annie Besant and Alfred Sinnott. Such readings help to better understand how the notions of karma, evolutionary cycles, universal brotherhood, and the comparative study of ancient religions fit together. It is also advisable to examine the history of the Theosophical movement, its splits, the influence of figures such as Annie Besant and Charles Leadbeater, and critically analyze both the achievements and the risks of Blavatskyan thought. This way, we can form a balanced view, avoiding blind idolatry and destructive skepticism. Ultimately, the enigma of Helena Blavatsky persists. Was she a spiritual master, an orchestrator of a rebirth of ancient knowledge, or a complex creator of myths and deceptions? Perhaps the answer is that she was all of the above at the same time. A woman with a volcanic personality who dared to merge East and West in a period marked by colonialism and the Industrial Revolution, attracting and repelling people in equal measure. Even though her writings contain flaws and reflect the prejudices of her era, the lasting impact of her concepts on the world's imagination is undeniable. In a time when science is advancing by leaps and bounds and technology is becoming ubiquitous, her prophecies about a civilization threatened by spiritual emptiness act as a mirror forcing humanity to confront its choices. For many, this is the essence of her message, that there is still time to change course, provided that one recognizes the reality of the spirit permeating matter and restores the balance between inner wisdom and external knowledge. In the face of ecological collapse and the rise of increasingly sophisticated artificial intelligences, Blavatsky's warnings echo as a signal flare. Her voice resounds in an age in which blind faith in mechanical systems, algorithms, and markets clashes with the lack of shared ethical principles, leaving a vacuum that can be filled by either the light of compassion or the shadows of self-interest. Thus, Helena Blavatsky's call is not about adopting a new sect or dogma, but an invitation for each individual to find within themselves the source of wisdom that can illuminate personal and collective decisions. If we fail in this purpose, we may witness the fulfillment of the dark visions of a world devastated by materialistic exploitation and progressive dehumanization. However, if we manage to balance reason and spirituality, we can envision a more radiant future, approaching that sixth root race she described as the age of intuition and direct knowledge. More than a century after her death, Helena Blavatsky continues to inspire researchers, seekers, and the curious who grope for answers amid current crises. Her biography and ideas converge to remind us that history is not merely linear, but cyclical and laden with opportunities to awaken. Whether through the study of ancient traditions or the investigation of psychological and quantum phenomena, Blavatsky's spirit continues to provoke those not satisfied with shallow truths. Possibly, the great lesson she left us is that wisdom cannot be controlled by institutions or suppressed by political or economic interests. It lives in the depths of the mind and the soul, waiting for the moment to emerge. If these reflections prompt you to explore Helena Blavatsky's worldview, various editions of her works can be found in specialized bookstores or even online. The abridged and annotated version of The Secret Doctrine, prepared by Michael Gomes, is an excellent entry point for those daunted by the original volume, which runs into the thousands of pages. Among her many influences, we can highlight the dialogue she facilitated with science, asserting that one day, academic research would acknowledge the role of consciousness in shaping reality. For those who wish to tread this path, there is a vast field of study that encompasses the relationship between quantum physics and spirituality. the practice of meditation, deep ecology, and questioning the foundations of our model of progress. It's also worth noting that Blavatsky's figure appeared in various literary and artistic works throughout the 20th century. Poets such as W.B. Yeats, artists like Wassily Kandinsky, and even filmmakers interested in mystical themes found in her vast repository of symbols and ideas an inexhaustible source of inspiration. Kandinsky, for example, connected his conceptions of abstract art to insights derived from esoteric teachings that partially trace back to theosophy. Yeats, in his poems, touches on motifs that echo Blavatsky's cyclical view of time and the perception that humanity advances in spirals, each cycle bringing new opportunities for enlightenment. Such influences demonstrate how theosophy, while a target of many controversies, helped shape artistic, literary, and even philosophical currents characteristic of much of the 20th century. Finally, it's always good to remember that Helena Blavatsky's legacy need not be followed uncritically, as if it were a new religion. She herself emphasized that the spiritual path requires independence of thought and the courage to question everything, including her own teachings. From her perspective, truth is not confined to books or temples, but lies in direct experience within each person, revealed through sincere pursuit. Thus, studying Blavatsky can be a rich and transformative journey, as long as we do not neglect critical sense, and remember that true knowledge should lead to an ethic of care and responsibility for all beings. That is the core of her final warning to humanity. If we do not awaken in time to the sacred dimension of life, the consequences could be irreversible. However, she also asserted that the power to choose is always in our hands, and it is our free will that may determine whether we move toward ruin or regeneration. Therefore, when considering Helena Blavatsky's prophecies about ecological collapse, mental manipulation by artificial intelligence, and the spiritual decline of the West, we see that her discourse, though shaped by a 19th century fraught with cultural conflicts, still resonates with many of our modern anxieties. At the same time, her work offers an invitation to recover universal values, compassion, fraternity, respect for nature, and to balance them with technological progress so that material achievements do not harm the very essence of humanity. If we are willing to read these messages carefully, we may discover paths to avoid the catastrophes she foretold. After all, human history is forged by the interplay between our free choices and the collective forces that arise in each civilization. And, in Blavatsky's words, although we may appear small before the vastness of the cosmos, we carry within us the same divine spark that moves the stars. Everything depends on how we decide to use it, whether for harmony or discord. Thus, we conclude that Helena Blavatsky not only challenged the thinking of her time, but also left a legacy that, whether we agree with her theses or not, inspires profound reflections on the human condition, on the role of the sacred in our daily lives, and on the future prospects of our civilization. Amid the controversies and possible truths, she remains an icon of esotericism, a messenger of forceful warnings, and a dreamer of an era in which science and spirituality could walk hand in hand. Whether her call is genuine or merely the product of grandiose rhetoric is for each of us to decide. But its echo has certainly not died away. In this year of 2025, more than ever, perhaps it is worthwhile to revisit Helena Blavatsky's messages and reflect on how ready we are to align science, spirit, and collective responsibility.